You're watching the most exciting game you will ever see on your TV set. Telstar by Coleco, with 3 different games. Telstar Tennis, with digital scoring, variable speeds. Telstar Hockey. Each player controls a goalie plus a forward on the other side. Oops, a goal. And Telstar Singles Handball, a game you play yourself. Telstar Handball, Tennis, Hockey. All 3 at an exciting low price. For great family fun, hitch your TV to a Telstar by Coleco.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Classic Gaming Brothers. I'm Seth.
And I'm Zach.
And we are the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right, we are the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right.
That's right.
Zach, you've been feeling a little under the weather today.
I have been under the weather, so for all of our listeners, if you're wondering why my voice sounds a little different, I don't know how different it sounds. I've been told I sound back to my normal self, but I had the flu.
Yes, and I didn't. But I have a question, though.
Sure.
If you're in an airplane, are you over the weather?
Yeah.
Anyway. Zach, what have you been playing recently?
Seth, recently I've been playing Black Mesa Blue Shift, which I think I've talked a little bit about before. It's a mod for the game Black Mesa, which is a full remake of the original Half-Life done in the Source engine, though it is not just like Half-Life brought to Half-Life 2. It is a full reimagining of the original Half-Life using, I would say, like a modern energy, modern graphics, a modern design. But Black Mesa Blue Shift is a mod of Black Mesa that is intending to bring the game Blue Shift up to the same standard. Blue Shift was a 1998 expansion to Half-Life where you play as Barney Calhoun, a security guard at the Black Mesa Research Facility, and during one of his usual security shifts, the Resonance Cascade, created by Gordon Freeman in the Sector C test labs scientists, occurs, and Barney goes from having a pretty mediocre day to having a pretty terrible day as aliens begin to be beamed into the facility. So Barney's job is to get the heck out of Black Mesa, and to do so, he has to find a scientist named Dr. Rosenberg. And Black Mesa Blue Shift recreates this story, though with some additions. There's more NPCs that you get to work with. There is a bit more cinematic elements to it, and the design of it has been substantially made grander than what the original Blue Shift had to offer. It really gives the 1998 game a fresh modern coat of paint, using all the same assets for Black Mesa, which already is such a great remake of Half-Life. It's a really fun mod. I've been enjoying it. They're still working on it. It's not yet finished. So currently there are 5 chapters out of 8. There are 8 chapters in Blue Shift. So if they're following the actual structure of Blue Shift and they aren't going to make any deviations, we're expecting at least 8 chapters of the mod. They haven't indicated whether or not they are going to lengthen the story at all. I mean, it's pretty compact. Barney is kind of lucky in the Black Mesa world, in the Half-Life world. In Blue Shift, as a spoiler, he's one of the few people that doesn't encounter the G-Man and get picked up. So he actually gets out of Black Mesa at the end. You literally get beamed in front of a car as other scientists are breaking down a fence, and they're like, all right, Barney, let's go. And they load you in the car and you drive away. So he manages to get out of Black Mesa, unlike Gordon, who gets taken by the G-Man, and Adrian Shepard, who gets taken by the G-Man and promptly forgotten about.
Is Adrian Shepard's just like a guard?
Adrian Shepard's a military person from Opposing Force, but he gets picked by the G-Man for some reason. At the end of Opposing Force, the G-Man comes and takes him away. Oh. Which is lucky for him, because I guess when he gets taken away, then Black Mesa gets nuked, so...
That's fair.
It is fair. But the Black Mesa Blue Shift does a fun job at kind of rebuilding the world of Black Mesa from the perspective of Barney. It has a lot of really fun moments in it that I liked that were added. One of my favorite being when Barney is coming into his day at Black Mesa, he gets locked out of a security station. And in Black Mesa and in Half-Life, when you're on the tram, you see Barney knocking on a door trying to get into the security station because he's been locked out. When you play as Barney, if you turn around at the right moment, you'll see Gordon Freeman on the little tram. And you see that in the original Blue Shift, but in Black Mesa Blue Shift, Gordon waves at you. And it's just a fun little moment where he's just like, hey, how's it going? Because the characters canonically know each other, as in Half-Life 2, Barney mentions to Gordon about that beer I owe you, and implies that he owes Gordon a beer. And they make reference to the whole beer thing, where people, when you talk to like other security guards, they'll just be like, hey, aren't you the guy that owes a bunch of people beer? And yeah, just, you know, Barney is apparently a guy that just always owes people beer.
That's not a reputation that you necessarily want.
I don't think he wants it either. Anyway, that's Black Mesa Blue Shift. It is free, though you do need to have Black Mesa to play it, and Black Mesa is not free. It is a $20 game on Steam. Worth playing if you like Half-Life.
And cheaper than the game I've recently been playing.
Yeah, what game have you been recently playing, Seth?
I've been playing Avowed, which was developed by Obsidian and published by Microsoft, or specifically through their Xbox division. Obsidian is also owned by Microsoft, so you can say that it was developed and published by Microsoft, but by different divisions within it. Avowed was released on February 18th of this year, 2025, and is a first-person fantasy RPG set in the world of Aora, which is the world of Pillars of Eternity, and you navigate and play through the Pillars of Eternity world, but instead of from a third-person isometric view, it's a first-person view. You get companions. There's 4, I think, in this game. I got the first one, named Kai, and his voice actor is the same voice actor as Garrus from Mass Effect, and he's also blue, kind of like Garrus, and it just kind of makes me feel like I have Garrus from Mass Effect in the Middle Ages, which is not necessarily a bad thing. The game is interesting. I've been enjoying it. It's definitely a departure from the other Pillars of Eternity. It's also a departure from a lot of, like, it's not Skyrim for sure. It is Skyrim-esque, but like certain areas will capstone with a boss fight, and the boss fight has like his own health bar, and it's definitely more arcadey, I think is the best word to describe. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. They also have the character tree is also simplified, so it's not like a robust RPG. If you're looking for an RPG where you're going to be like doing high-level math calculations in order to pick the best weapon spec or spec for your character, Avowed is not the one to go with. I would say something like Baldur's Gate 3 or even the original Pillars of Eternity or Pillars of Eternity 2 would probably be more of your speed if you want to like an in-depth RPG. The story is very good for Avowed. It's very much like Obsidian writing, very well written. Hasn't been like edge of the seat well written, but like it's still a good story. I'm interested. I'm vested into it, right? I like the characters that I'm being introduced to. I think the story so far is pretty compelling. There was a twist pretty early on that was pretty interesting and unexpected. There's some stuff going on in the world, which is, if you're not familiar with the Pillars Eternity world, I recommend they have like a dialogue helper that helps you define words that people say. It's very useful for somebody who is not used to the Pillars world, because the game has you play as this godlike creature, and godlikes are like almost essentially mutants because they're like touched by gods, but the gods are real in like Avowed world, but they're not. They're like creatures created by another race. They're kind of like the gods in the Avowed world are kind of like Reapers.
Oh, okay.
Some other race created them, and then that race that created them disappeared, and they got left behind, and they generally don't come to the main world. They stay in this like weird god world, and they exert power, and there's these things called Adra, which is like these crystals that you can interact with them if you have a connection to the gods. You don't play as a watcher, and nor is there any like abilities to have a sight. I really wanted to play a cipher, which is somebody who uses like mental like psionic powers, but that's not available. I am playing a mage, but because it's very arcadey, you can also be a mage that just hits people with a mace, because it's not really a class, it's just the skills that you use, and the skills that I've decided to use for this character is magic. Magic's pretty cool, but it's all based on combos, and like if you have a spell book, you can cast spells a little higher power and stuff like that, but you're just like spamming like 1, 2, 3, 4, like the buttons, instead of like being like, I'm casting this spell, I'm casting this spell. It's very more live and actiony, so it's definitely more of the action. I would say it's more of an action RPG with emphasis on action versus the RPG.
Does someone have to play Pillars of Eternity before they play Avowed?
No, but like I said earlier, you should use the dialogue helper. There's a little dialogue helper that comes up when somebody says some weird terms. Like they'll say like Adra, right? And then you can hold the F button down and you can read what an Adra is, which I wouldn't need because I know what an Adra is, but like you might not know what an Adra is.
Yeah, because I haven't played Pillars of Eternity.
Right, so you would need to look it up. And that's a very helpful thing to use. But yeah, it's good. I like it. I'll continue to play it. It is $70 for its MSRP, so like it's probably gonna go on sale maybe in 6 months, maybe in a year, maybe pick it up then. I'm not sure if I can give like a go buy it now recommendation, like especially for $70, but if it's on sale, it's probably worth a pickup.
Yeah. Hey,
it's also on Game Pass this month.
Ooh, so if you have Game Pass, you can download it and play it until it's no longer on Game Pass.
Correct.
Well, that sounds great. Well, today we are talking about something that, to be frank, it's a topic that has been sitting in my notes, our notes, for a few years. It's one of those things that I think would have been fun to talk about, but every time I have tried to sit down and start writing about it, I felt like I was just regurgitating already known information, but I still wanted to talk about it. So I decided I'm just going to go for it, and I started working on these notes, and I think they tell a good story. You see, we're talking about 1970s Pong consoles, specifically 1970s dedicated consoles, not just Pong, but dedicated units that were primarily built in the late 70s into the early 80s. And the reason we're talking about these is because we're a game podcast that talks about weird things, and sometimes we talk about topics that no one cares about except for me. Now, getting into the history of this whole topic, after the release of the first video game console, the Magnavox Odyssey, and before the release of the first video game system that used interchangeable cartridges, the Fairchild Channel F, there were still game systems that were being released. And these game systems were dedicated to do one thing and one thing only: Pong, or a variant of Pong. Before the creation of ROM cartridges, the only way to play a video game at home would be to buy a dedicated unit that sole purpose was to play a single game. And most of the time it was Pong. Occasionally it would be something like Breakout, they had a couple of combat machines, there was a racing one, but this is an era that I like to call the weird 1970s dedicated console era, though officially I think it's called by console collectors the first generation home video game console era. It's an interesting era because it's surprisingly robust, despite being largely only a period of about a few years. The list on Wikipedia, for example, contains 997 different consoles, with most of them releasing in 1977 or 1978, being released by every manufacturer that you could think of: Atari, Coleco, Audiosonic, Magnavox, APF, Bandai, Nintendo, Grandstand, JCPenney, Radio Shack, Sears, you name it. If you were a company, not even a games company, if you were a company back then, you probably had a Pong console with your name slapped on it. To make things simple, we're not going to talk about all 997 different variants of Pong, largely because most of them are identical to each other, just released in different boxes. We're going to break down this era, though, into different types of games that you would have seen and talk about some of the better known units. We'll talk about Pong systems, Breakout systems, tank systems, and light gun systems.
Tracking the first home Pong console is a bit tough. Some people will credit the Magnavox Odyssey as the first Pong console, as it did have a pretty rudimentary form of tennis on the unit, which tennis is just Pong. One of the earliest, with not a ton of information on it, that we could find was VideoMaster, released around 1974, as the VideoMaster home TV game device was capable of playing tennis along with some variations. Typical variations of the tennis/Pong formula would be something like squash, where two players are on one side and bounce the ball off a vertical line on the other side. The VideoMaster home TV game, per the highly reputable website oldest.com, Pong.org, was released in England as both a kit and a fully assembled unit. The system itself was a square metal box with 2 square controllers attached to it. The controllers featured a dial and a serve button. Atari would, of course, release their own version of Pong for the home market and cleverly call it Home Pong. One of the things that helped with Home Pong being able to be brought to the home market was the introduction of a large-scale integration chip to the electronics market. LSI chips were able to turn larger-scale circuit boards into a single chip, thanks to compact transistors and the whole thing with everything about how computers get smaller forever and ever and ever. Jazz. The transistors and the chips were also, at this time, cheap to mass produce, allowing for large-scale distribution. Now you have large-scale integration chips that are easy and cheap to buy.
What's interesting about the LSI chip that was primarily used for these Pong machines is that apparently it was really expensive to produce, but once they made the first one, it became very cheap to remake.
Right. Well, because they probably made a mold or something
Yeah,
like
so
that.
they were like, it took forever to get done and it was super expensive, and then finally when they're done, they're like, perfect, and they could just shell them out like on the dime.
It's also how drugs work. Atari had trouble getting Home Pong into catalogs, with most electronic retailers outright rejecting it due to the belief that it wouldn't be popular. Man, the tides have turned where electronic retailers hold the keys to the city of catalogs, and now the video game distributors would arguably hold the keys that electronic retailers can't.
Yeah.
To be able to be like, please, may I have some more Assassin's Creed? Atari would end up striking a deal with the reputable company of Sears and Roebuck to sell the unit under their own license called Telegames, and they would start selling around October of 1975. Classic Dad would go on to own one of these Telegames machines, and if he doesn't, now is a lie.
I think, from my understanding, he didn't own a Telegames Pong machine. He owned a Telegames and television because Sears branded everything as Telegames.
Oh, well, they're electronics. They branded it as Telegames.
Yes, yeah.
It'd be weird to have a drill that's branded Telegames.
Or pants.
Or pants. Telegame pants. Oh, no. Now I just want Sears to brand everything Telegames. The system would go on to retail around $98.95, which is great because it's $2.05 under $100. So it looks great. It's probably also during the time periods where we used to just put 8s at the end of things to make it crazy 8s.
Oh, yeah.
And today, that $98.95 in 1975 is equivalent to $568.42 today, thanks to the ever movement of time and inflation. With an optional AC adapter that would go on sale with the device for $7.95, bringing your 1975 total over $100. And that would also, that $7 would be $45.67 in today's money. The AC adapter was considered optional as the device was designed to be run on batteries, but if you wanted it to run on batteries for an extended period of time, probably wanted to get an AC adapter since alkaline batteries don't have as much juice as you want them to have.
Yeah. To be fair, they were running on C batteries, which...
They're C alkalines, though.
Yeah.
They did not get C lithium batteries in 1975.
You sure couldn't. Now, one thing that would make competition to Pong when it hit the market was the development of the AY3-8500 chip from General Instruments. This chip is estimated to have been in around 200 different units. So remember how I mentioned that there were 997 different Pong machines? 200 of those had the same exact chip, all from General Instruments, meaning General Instruments made bank. Now, in 1976, Coleco would release their own version of Pong for the home market under the Telstar brand. The Telstar machines utilize the AY3-8500 chip, allowing it to play hockey, handball, and tennis. The system also sold for $50 in 1976, which today would be $285. So it was selling about half of the cost of Atari's Pong or Telegames. So it was massively undercutting the Sears unit. The lower cost reflected in sales, with around 1 million units of Telstar being sold. Magnavox would also step on in, and they would release their own home console using the AY3-8500 chip. They called their home console the Odyssey 300. Despite the name being similar to the previously released Magnavox Odyssey, the device was not a Magnavox Odyssey. It was just a Pong system. It had a hockey, handball, and tennis. An updated model called the Odyssey 400 would release the same year, but would include some vast improvements, including, and get this, the ability to automatically serve the ball, meaning the ball, you wouldn't have to press a serve button. The ball would just automatically serve when you started the game. And here's another incredible improvement, Seth. It showed the score on the screen.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That is an improvement.
Before, you had to track the score on the console itself using a plastic dial.
Oh.
By hand. Yeah.
That sounds more like a board game than a video game.
The AY3-8500 chip would see some revisions, such as the 8610, which featured more games and the ability to add color if you coupled it with the 8615 chip. Not all of these dedicated Pong units use this chip, however. For example, Nintendo over in Japan would create the color TV game unit starting in 1977. This line of game systems was part of Nintendo's growing interest into this little thing called the home video game market, largely in hopes that they could capitalize on the success of Space Invaders from Taito. And also, they wanted to make money during the 1973 oil crisis that had put a hamper on the production of toys. Nintendo at the time was primarily a toy company, so when the oil crisis hit and production of toys skyrocketed in cost because of the cost of oil, then they needed to put their money elsewhere, and home electronics seemed the place to go. Nintendo also wanted to make sure their systems were cheap. They really only cared about making money from the consumer. They did not care about having something overly complicated or expensive. So they just put out cheap units that they could sell for a low cost to get some money during this time. Their first was called the TV Game 6, which is confusing, but it was called the TV Game 6 because it has 6 variants of Pong, not because it's the 6th TV game. Also, I think it might be a little late to clarify, but most Pong variants really just change up things like paddles, size of paddles, and the size of the goal. So when you hear us referring to having 6 versions of Pong, it's really one version of Pong. It's just sometimes there's more than 2 paddles on the screen. Sometimes there are 4 paddles, and sometimes you control 2 of those paddles at once. Like Seth mentioned earlier, there's the squash variant where 2 people are on the same side and there's just one long paddle basically blocking one side. There's something called the hockey variant where the goal is small. It's just a small little cube as opposed to the entire side of the screen being the goal. So it's reminiscent of a hockey goal box. There's also like a variant where doubles where you have multiple different paddles. It's really just trying to redesign the same thing to be more fun. You know, you wouldn't want to just play one game basically. The physical design of these systems is also all over the place. Some look like plastic units that have slots where the controllers would sit. Others had controls built into them. Some of the machines are literally just the controllers, with all the internals for the actual machine being found in controller 1. There's really no rhyme or reason to the design, even from the companies that made them. Like Magnavox put out a few, and they look radically different. Some of them look kind of the same, but some of them don't look the same. So it's interesting to see just how many times they try to rebrand the same thing, just in a different style.
Atari didn't just stop with Pong. Beyond a few different versions of the game, like Super Pong, which features color and 4 players, Atari would also use a modified AY3-870-60 Pong chip to release a dedicated version of their game Stunt Cycle to the home market. The Stunt Cycle machine is relatively unique looking, as the entire console looks like the handlebar grips to a motorcycle. You use these grips in the comfort of your own home to rev your motorcycle to do wheelies or jumps. Sears released their own version called Motocross Sports Center 4, which was also released on their Telegame series. So if you wanted to go into your Sears and Roebucks and go over to the Telegame series, you too could also own a Motocross Sports Center 4, which featured Stunt Cycle and also included detachable Pong controllers, so you could still play Pong. So you didn't need a Pong machine, you could just get your Motocross Sports Center 4 machine and play Pong and Stunt Cycle on the same machine. Then Atari would go on to release Breakout in the arcades, and it meant finding a way to bring it back home, because they found out that if they sell their games from their arcade to the home, they can make more money. And guess what Atari likes? at this time, money. They eventually will not, well, they'll eventually lose the ability to get money.
For some reason, they decided they hate money later.
They do decide to hate money later. And that's what Chapter 11 bankruptcy is. In 1977, they released the Video Pinball home console, which not only included Breakout, but was primarily sold as a home pinball device, which had bumper controls on either side of the units. The original release also came with two versions, a cream color model and a wood grain model. So if you wanted to have it either blend in with your other wood grain AV units or be something off-white sitting in the corner, don't worry. Atari's got you covered. Sears would also bundle the unit under their Telegames brand.
I have the cream-colored model of the Atari unit for video pinball.
Do you feel like playing a pinball machine when you play it?
Yeah, kind of. If the pinball machine was ugly and not very fun.
Or have any pinball in it.
Well, it does have pinball. It's just not good pinball.
But the pinball's on the TV.
Yeah, it's on the TV.
It's not pinball like the ball going up and hitting things. You just have bumpers and then you're controlling some dot on the pit screen.
Yeah.
Is it any fun?
It's kind of fun.
If you had nothing else, it would be fun.
Yeah, if like the internet stopped working forever.
And all of your books and other...
Yeah, if literally there was no media left except for video pinball, I would probably have a good time. At least for an hour.
So don't stock it in your bunker if you're prepping.
Right.
Color TV game Block Breaker would be released from Nintendo in 1979 and would continue on with being a Breakout-style game. Since this is the time when video games were made and they were very simple and you couldn't license or intellectually control very simple games. It's very difficult to go to court and be like, listen, they stole our unique game. And the judge is like, it's a ball that hits bricks. And they're like, yeah, we did it first. And the judge is like, no, anyone who's tossed a ball at a wall has done it first. Nintendo Color TV game Block Breaker, they also needed to work on their names of their systems.
They really did.
The Color TV game Block Breaker would not contain any pinball-style games, nor have any pinball-style controllers. The system ran a version of a Nintendo arcade game called Block Breaker, which was based on Breakout. It is also notable that the external design of the system was done by Shigeru Miyamoto, who would go on to work on far more notable and memorable pieces.
Yes, but this was apparently his first.
Well, he did a good enough job to stay around.
Yeah. Now, in 1977, Coleco released Combat as a home console. It was based on the arcade machine Tank, developed by Key Games and released in 1974. Instead of it being a Pong-style game, Combat is a tank combat game where you control either a white or black tank on the screen. The console itself is really unique looking. It features 4 joysticks, 2 for each player, and it has the color scheme of a tank, complete with having camouflage stickers on it. And boy, oh boy, is it something to behold. Seth, I'm going to actually find a picture to show you, because I think you need to see this ugly thing that existed for a bit. Oh, there it is. It's so gorgeous.
Oh. Yeah. That looks like it is. I do like it has the picture of the tank at the bottom.
Oh yeah, the little picture of the...
I wish I played Tank on this. I played Combat on the Atari 2600.
Yeah.
And I had to use the Atari 2600 controller. If I played Combat on the Coleco with this controller, that would have been amazing. It looks like it looks like someone who is driving a Tonka tank.
It really does. Yeah.
Yeah, if you had like a Tonka tank and you had a friend and you connected them together and you each drove Tonka tanks together, that's what this controller looks like. It's also like faded green
with camo stickers.
Yeah, with camo stickers, and it's like the green color of my car, which is like plasma color. It's just weird.
It is very weird. Coleco Combat is somewhat similar, though, as Seth noted, to Atari's Combat. They're very similar games. Combat for the Atari is based on Tank by key games. Coleco's came out a little earlier. The major difference, though, is Atari's version is in color. Coleco's version is in black and white. So I think that's why they made the console so colorful looking, because all the color went into the unit itself, not the actual game. Now, similar combat-style games would release in other countries. There was Heroic Tank from Conic in Hong Kong, Combat Lumiere in France, and the most mouthful of a game system I have ever seen, 4711, Most Exciting Tank Battle, released in Australia, which is a great name for a console. The other big type of dedicated console you would get is the light gun-based system. Some of the most familiar being are the ones released by Coleco in their Telstar line. One of the early units they put out in 1977, I'm going to say is kind of cheating, but we will never have a time to talk about it besides this episode. It's not technically a dedicated unit. It is the Telstar Arcade, which is a weird triangle thing that plays all sorts of games. And Seth, I gotta show you what the Coleco Telstar Arcade looks like.
Wow, that looks fun.
Yeah, it is a brown triangle. On one side of the triangle, you have dials, like Pong. On another side of the triangle, you have a steering wheel with a shifter for driving. And on the third side, you have a revolver just in a holster.
Yeah, for shooting people. And it's not like a fake looking revolver. It looks like a real thing.
Oh no, I'm pretty sure it didn't even have an orange tip on it.
That was back in the 70s when people did crazy things with toys. The Telstar Arcade is a kind of a cartridge-based console in that it had 4 different cartridges. Each cartridge contained a CPU that contained the game. The cartridges were weird triangles that would latch into the top horizontal position, which I'm guessing is that gray thing.
Yeah, that's the cartridge.
Yeah, so it's like you take this little triangle and you stick it into the bigger triangle. That's the console.
Yeah.
That's also simultaneously the controller.
Yes.
And it looks like you're activating Ultron.
Yeah.
The games were primarily in black and white, though did feature a bit of color depending on the game being played. Coleco also released the Telstar Ranger in 1977, which primarily featured shooting games and Pong-style games. The shooting games would usually feature something like a moving target, similar in appearance to a Pong square that you would have to shoot. If you hit the target, you scored a point. So if you played Pong long enough and you started to get mad at the little ball, you could then play the shooting version where you shot the ball. The era of dedicated home consoles died with the advent of the interchangeable ROM cartridge. That being said, Pong machines would continue to be released throughout the 1980s and into the 1990s, because what is life without cheap plastic wrap to fill the bargain toy sections of your local drugstore and convenience stores?
Yeah.
In fact, the leader from Electronica, spelled with a K instead of a C, was released in 1993 in the Soviet Union, which was a Pong machine. Is the device red and has the hammer and sickle on it? Like, what? It's called the Leader.
I don't think so, sadly.
That is a name for a device for sure.
It is certainly ugly looking, if this is it.
Oh, yeah, that's probably it. It's blue, and it looks like it's made of plastic that would feel weird when you touch it, like that really cheap plastic. And then it's covered in stickers that tell you what the various different things do, like controllers and fast forward, I guess, is an option.
Yeah.
It kind of looks like if you had a cheap plastic blue VHS rewinder with no place to put in a VHS and only had vents.
Yeah.
There has been a slight revival of dedicated consoles with the advent of plug-and-play style of systems. These also were often sold in toy stores for relatively cheap price, often bundled with a variety of games for systems like the Atari, NES, or Sega Game Gear, and are still widely available and still have thousands and hundreds of thousands of games of questionable origin.
And for anyone who's interested in Pong machines or dedicated Pong units, I do want to say that thankfully, to get into them, it's not going to take you a long time to look for one. On eBay, for example, if you look up Pong console, immediately you have early Pong machines, some of them being well-known, some of them being like random. I see one for an Apollo 200 Interpex Pong machine going for $25. There's an Atari Pong Model C, $60. a Atari C402 Ultra Pong 65, a vintage 1976 Magnavox Odyssey 300, $23. So they are plentiful and they are usually kind of cheap. I would say most of them you can probably find for under $100. If someone is trying to sell you a Pong machine for like over $100, that's not some actual rare thing like one of the Nintendo ones, then you're probably being ripped off. The Nintendo ones are the only ones that really ever go for value unless it's like a really obscure thing. Yeah, keep on the lookout for Pong machines if you want to play Pong and nothing else. Well, that being said, we're going to get into our retro rewind. So I'll go first. Seth had me play Super Tennis for the Super Nintendo, developed by Tosei back in 1991. It's a really fun tennis game for the Super Nintendo, though I am not good at tennis apparently. I don't know if I'm just bad at this tennis game, but I couldn't get a single point against the CPU. My only points were being awarded because the CPU occasionally hit the net with their ball. So I literally was only getting points due to faults. That said though, it has really nice snappy controls, fun sound effects, and overall pretty good graphics. I think it does hold up. It's one of those games that I definitely could see myself playing with people. Maybe the CPU is just a little too tough for me, but yeah, that's Super Tennis for the Super Nintendo. Next week, Seth, I want you to play a game, and I want you to play a game called Power Pigs of the Dark Age for the Super Nintendo.
All right, sounds great. Zach had me play Tecmo NBA Basketball for the NES, which was developed by Sculptured Software and published by Tecmo. The game was released in 1992 and features all the current NBA teams and players from the 1991 and 1992 NBA season, including Michael Jordan, Larry Bird, and Magic Johnson, who technically didn't play a game in the 91 to 92 season, but they included him anyway. I think there was some stuff where like Bird only played a little bit of it, and they just throw them all in. For a basketball game on the NES, there was plenty of dithering, where the players just kind of, as you run across the screen, most of the characters just kind of vanish or become a bunch of lines and stuff like that, as any NES game with a lot of sprites happens. But it's actually a pretty decent basketball game. I also got my butt kicked, but I did it because I was incompetent and not because the game was bad. It was still fun. I think Tecmo does a really good job with making sports games. And like we've played Tecmo Super Bowl and Tecmo NBA basketball. I think they have a Tecmo baseball out there, but they're all really well done. And so is the Tecmo NBA basketball for the NES. However, I still really enjoy the arcadiness of NBA Jam style games. But however, if you want a serious game, the Tecmo series is pretty good for being serious. NBA Jam is good for when you want your character's basketball to turn on fire, which, I have to remind everybody, does not actually happen in basketball. Next week, Zach, you can play Ixtasia for the MS-DOS.
Great, I will. Well, thank you everyone for listening. If you have any memories playing Pong or a Pong-related game or anything like that on your home dedicated console, let us know. Email us at classicgamingbrothers@gmail.com. We're available wherever podcasts can be found via Podbean, iTunes, or iHeartRadio. We're also available on social media. Check us out, Classic Gaming Brothers or CG Brothers Pod. And that being said, Seth, am I forgetting anything?
Don't play games like my brother.
And don't play games like my brother.
I've been Seth.
And I've been Zach.
And we've been the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right.
Right.